What does it take to truly see a person for who they are, beyond the clothes they wear or the air they present? At Lumiere, one of Beverly Hills' most prestigious restaurants, where status and sophistication reign, a single evening unraveled assumptions, revealing a truth often forgotten. Diana, a seasoned waitress, prided herself on serving only the elite, until a quiet man in worn jeans and scuffed boots walked in, unknowingly challenging her perception of worth. With a practiced smile but a judgmental heart, she sought to dismiss him, unaware that her assumptions would soon be turned upside down. Who was he, really? And what lesson would he leave behind, not just for Diana, but for everyone watching? The answer would change the restaurant forever. Before we continue this story, tell us where you are watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Lumiere was one of the most renowned restaurants in Beverly Hills, a true gem in a city known for luxury and sparkle. Its tall glass facade reflected the glow of designer storefronts and neon signs that lit up the avenue after dusk. Inside, gilded chandeliers shimmered across marble floors, casting elegant reflections on plush seating arrangements. Everything about Lumiere was curated to impress, from the soft hum of classical music playing in the background to the delicate floral centerpieces on every table. Diana, one of the restaurant's most seasoned waitresses, prided herself on being an integral part of this world of grandeur. She wore her black and white uniform with meticulous care, her hair pinned neatly in a sleek bun, and her expression perfected for a clientele that expected nothing less than flawless service. For Diana, working at Lumiere wasn't just a job, it was a status symbol. She boasted to friends that she served the city's most influential and discerning patrons. Yet beneath her polished exterior lurked a tendency to judge people quickly, a habit that often morphed into condescension and arrogance. That evening, a man walked through the heavy glass doors, dressed in a simple shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. He carried himself quietly, as though he didn't want to draw any attention. The subdued lighting in the foyer revealed his features: calm eyes, slightly unkempt hair, a hint of gentle humility in his demeanor. It was none other than Keanu Reeves. He had come alone, seeking a private moment in a city so often ablaze with paparazzi lights. At first glance, Diana found him suspicious. He didn't wear the usual tailored suit or stylish designer shoes she'd come to expect from Lumiere's clientele. Intrigued but also irritated, she stepped away from an ongoing conversation with another staff member and approached him at the reception desk. "May I help you?" she asked, a professionally sweet smile dancing on her lips. Yet her tone held an undercurrent of disapproval. She couldn't fathom why someone dressed like him would be here. Keanu replied politely, "I'd like a table, please." "Of course," she said, forcing her grin to widen, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "But do you have a reservation?" He shook his head. "No, I'm afraid not. I was hoping to find a seat anyway." Diana lifted an eyebrow. She stole a quick glance at the booking monitor to confirm that there were indeed tables open, but it was more of a performance than a necessity. She already knew they had availability. "Right," she sighed, closing the monitor and turning to face him fully. "Well, we do have a few tables free, but Lumiere isn't really a casual spot. Are you sure this is where you want to dine?" Keanu merely nodded, his expression unruffled. He neither apologized nor reacted to the hint of contempt in her voice. That subtle composure piqued Diana's annoyance further. She was used to guests trembling under her withering stares if they didn't look the part, but this man stayed calm, almost serene. "All right then," she said briskly, grabbing a menu and beckoning him to follow. She led him past the beautifully set tables near the windows, where local celebrities often dined, and headed for a dimmer corner by the kitchen. The clang of pots and pans resonated through the wall. "Here," she announced, dropping the menu onto the small table. "I think you'll find this area comfortable." Keanu looked around, taking in the glaring difference between this cramped space and the grand main dining room. Yet he didn't complain. He offered Diana a polite smile. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice calm, almost soothing in its gentleness. "Sure," Diana replied, turning on her heel. She couldn't resist muttering under her breath, "He won't last 5 minutes once he sees the prices." From that vantage point, Keanu could observe the rest of Lumiere without being seen much himself. He opened the menu, scanning its pages. Some dishes soared well into triple-digit prices. His eyes flickered with mild amusement. Meanwhile, Diana, stationed at the bar, glared over at him occasionally, whispering to a fellow server about her charity case in the corner. A few patrons noticed Diana's less-than-subtle sneers. An older man, Charles, dressed in a sharp suit, observed the scene from across the dining room. He raised an eyebrow, curious why a humble-looking customer warranted such disdain. At a nearby table, a well-dressed couple, Nate and Olivia, exchanged glances, sensing an undercurrent of tension they didn't quite understand yet. Unaware of their silent witnesses, Diana decided to escalate her tactic. She marched toward Keanu, pen and pad in hand. "Ready to order?" she asked, barely disguising her contempt. "Yes," Keanu said pleasantly, pointing to one of the pricier entrees on the menu. "I'd like to try this, if possible." Diana's eyes narrowed. "The filet de Rossini? That's $300. Are you sure that's what you want?" His expression betrayed no unease. "I am," he replied gently, handing her the menu. She forced a short laugh. "Well, all right. Don't say I didn't warn you." Then she strutted off, convinced she would savor the moment he recoiled at the final bill. But as the night wore on, Keanu maintained his tranquil demeanor. Servers whispered among themselves, and a hush of curiosity began circulating among the other guests. Who was this unassuming man, so calm amidst Diana's sharp jabs and the restaurant's lavish atmosphere? There was an unspoken tension building in the air, one that signaled something more was about to unfold, something that would catch everyone off guard. Diana stalked away from Keanu's table, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. In her mind, he was merely another out-of-place visitor who wouldn't be able to keep up with Lumiere's upscale environment. She seemed almost eager to see him fail, to witness that moment when he'd realize the prices were out of his reach and slink out in embarrassment. She made a grand show of ignoring his order slip, which she waved around in front of her coworker, Lisa, by the service station. "I'll drop this off when I get a chance," Diana declared loudly, as if she were far too busy handling more important patrons. Lisa, visibly uncomfortable, began to protest, "But you should put it in now. Chef Carlo hates delays." Diana shrugged, rolling her eyes. "I'll handle it." Across the restaurant, Keanu took in the ambience. The soaring ceilings, gentle orchestral music, and the clink of champagne glasses formed a tapestry of opulence. He caught sight of Charles, the older gentleman who had been watching him earlier, raising a discreet glass in his direction. Keanu responded with a friendly nod, his lips curving into a small smile. It was a moment of silent camaraderie in a place that otherwise buzzed with superficial chatter. Meanwhile, at a centrally located table, Nate and Olivia, the elegant couple who had also noticed Diana's coldness, exchanged glances. "That waitress seems determined to rile him up," Olivia whispered, leaning closer to Nate. "Why on earth is she so hostile?" Nate gently shook his head. "No clue, but it's so unprofessional." They, too, found themselves quietly rooting for the calm stranger in the corner. After some time, Diana finally submitted Keanu's order to the kitchen, but not without making a spectacle of it. Chef Carlo frowned when he realized how long the slip had been sitting around. "Diana, if this order is delayed, I hope you're prepared to deal with the consequences," he warned, not bothering to hide his irritation. Diana just snorted dismissively. "Trust me, chef. This guy won't be complaining. He's a little out of his element." Chef Carlo eyed her skeptically but proceeded to prepare the meal. A masterpiece of filet de Rossini with a delicate sauce and precisely garnished vegetables. By the time the dish was finished, it sat under a warming lamp for longer than it should have. Diana had paused to chat with a pair of influencers she deemed more worthy of her attention. Eventually, she carried the plate to Keanu, placing it down with a flourish that bordered on theatrical. "Your filet," she announced, fresh from the kitchen. There was a hint of mockery in her eyes, as if anticipating a negative reaction to either the portion size or the sophisticated flavors. Keanu, however, merely thanked her, picking up his fork with unruffled grace. Striving for one more jab, Diana leaned in. "Just remember, we expect a minimum tip of 20%, she said in a hushed voice that nonetheless carried to the ears of nearby diners, including Nate and Olivia. Keanu met her gaze and nodded calmly. "I understand," he replied. She lingered a moment, as if hoping for a sign of panic in his eyes, then retreated, somewhat deflated by his unwavering politeness. Nate and Olivia exchanged outraged looks. "I can't believe she said that," murmured Olivia. "So tacky," Nate added. They had never seen a waiter at Lumiere act so brazenly. Seated just behind them, Charles frowned, tapping his fingers on the table in disapproval. He was old enough to remember when courtesy was paramount, and he detested the thought of anyone being mistreated in such a public way. Keanu savored his meal slowly, seemingly impervious to the tension swirling around him. The filet was exquisite, Chef Carlo's culinary genius evident in every bite. Yet the rest of the dining room buzzed with uncomfortable whispers. The rumor that the strangely dressed man was being mistreated had spread to most of the guests. Some cast sympathetic glances, others looked uneasy, but no one intervened directly. From the bar, Diana's voice rose loud enough to be overheard. "I'm betting he's never eaten anything like that in his life. Let's see if he even knows how to properly cut the fillet." A coworker, trying to hush her, mumbled, "Diana, please. People are staring." But she dismissed it with a wave of her hand, continuing, "People like him come here to feel important, but they can't handle the real bill. Just wait until he sees the total cost." In that moment, Charles stood, wine glass in hand, and discreetly made his way to Keanu's table. Bowing slightly, he introduced himself with old-fashioned politeness. "Excuse me, sir. I hope I'm not intruding, but I've observed the way you've been treated. I just wanted to say I admire your composure." Keanu looked up and offered a warm smile. "Thank you, Charles. I appreciate your kindness." The older man nodded, placing a hand lightly on Keanu's shoulder. "If there's anything you need, some extra water, a different seat, just let me know. This is unacceptable." Still calm, Keanu shook his head. "I'm all right, truly, but your thoughtfulness means a lot." Charles regarded him for a moment longer, then returned to his seat, shooting Diana a pointed look that made her bristle. Lisa, noticing the exchange, whispered to another coworker, "He's not even upset. It's like he's beyond this nonsense." The hush in the room felt electric, charged by an anticipation that something significant was about to happen. Diana, sensing the collective disapproval from multiple tables, grew increasingly uneasy, though she tried hard not to show it. "Let's see him try to pay," she muttered under her breath. "That'll be the end of it." But as she stacked dirty plates at a nearby table, she failed to notice that the restaurant's manager, Philip, had just arrived. He stood near the entrance, scanning the floor for any sign of trouble. His eyes narrowed when they landed on Diana's stiff posture and Keanu's corner table. The once lively hum of conversation seemed overshadowed by tension. Something was definitely off. Philip caught Lisa's eye, and she motioned ever so slightly toward Diana and Keanu. Concern etched across his features. He started to make his way through the labyrinth of tables. At that very moment, Diana prepared to drop a final snarky comment as she passed Keanu. The stage was set, and the unspoken question in every mind was, when would the truth come to light? Philip, the manager, was a tall man in his late 40s with neatly combed hair and an impeccably tailored suit. Known for his fair demeanor and commitment to Lumiere's vision, he prided himself on ensuring that everyone, from celebrity regulars to first-timers, felt valued. But as he approached, he could already sense the tension rolling off Diana, who was in the midst of delivering a cutting remark in Keanu's direction. "Can I help you with anything?" Philip asked politely, though his tone carried an undercurrent of concern. Diana spun around, momentarily startled, but quickly recovered with a forced laugh. "Oh, hey, Philip. Everything's under control. I was just—" Her words faltered when she saw the deep frown settling across his face. Philip's gaze traveled from her stiff posture to Keanu's calm expression. He instantly recognized that something was amiss. He'd known Keanu was a key stakeholder in this establishment, though not many employees were fully aware, and the last thing he wanted was for any staff member to offend him. But beyond that, Philip believed in treating every patron with genuine respect, whether or not they had an official title or a celebrity status. Keanu looked up, meeting Philip's eyes with his usual gentleness. A faint smile touched his lips. "Good evening, Philip. It's been a while." Diana's mouth dropped. "Good evening, Philip?" She realized that Keanu knew the manager by name. You know each other?" She stammered, color draining from her cheeks. Philip cleared his throat. "Yes, we do. Mr. Reeves has an important connection to Lumiere." He kept his tone measured, but there was no mistaking the gravity in his voice. "Is everything all right, sir?" Keanu nodded softly. "I'm fine. Dinner was lovely. But there is a concern I'd like to address, privately perhaps?" Glancing around at the watchful guests, Philip pressed his lips together in a tight line. "Of course. Diana, I think you should join us. Let's step away from the dining area." He gestured toward a quieter alcove near the back hallway, away from the kitchen bustle. Charles, Nate, Olivia, and many other patrons exchanged curious looks. They watched as Diana followed Philip and Keanu, her once confident stride replaced by halting, uneasy steps. A hush fell over the dining room, and the soft clinking of silverware seemed amplified in the sudden silence. Once they stood in a discreet corner, Keanu turned to Diana, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable note of seriousness. "I appreciate the work you do here. It's never easy to manage a busy dining room. But I believe there was a misunderstanding about who deserves courtesy in this place." Diana swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had never considered that the man in scuffed boots might be connected to Lumiere in any official capacity, let alone hold a position of ownership. I didn't know who you were," she mumbled, clinging to the last shred of self-defense. Philip's eyes flashed with disappointment. "Diana, that's the problem. It shouldn't matter who he is. Every customer should be treated with respect. This is the core principle I've emphasized since day one." She glanced down, cheeks burning. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I was just trying to maintain our standards." Keanu inclined his head. "I understand wanting to keep things professional, but kindness is never unprofessional. Your standards should include empathy for everyone, not just those you assume can afford it or appear a certain way." A wave of realization washed over Diana, and tears threatened to spill. "I let my assumptions get the better of me," she admitted, hardly above a whisper. "I suppose I was judging a book by its cover." Philip stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We can all learn from mistakes. The question is whether you're willing to grow from this." Diana nodded vigorously, tears pooling in her eyes. "I am. I promise." Outside in the dining room, an undercurrent of speculation ran wild. Some patrons whispered about whether the man in the corner was a secret investor, a philanthropist, or perhaps even more famous than they realized. The tension had shifted to a collective anticipation that something major was about to be revealed. Charles, quietly sipping his wine, remarked to Nate and Olivia, "There's a lesson here for all of us, I think. We jump to conclusions about people and forget that simple decency is a universal right." Nate nodded. "Sometimes. It takes a situation like this to remind us of our own prejudices. I hope it ends well." Back in the alcove, Keanu gave Diana a measured nod. "We'll address this as a team after closing. For now, do you think you can return to the dining room and treat the rest of your tables with courtesy and grace?" She exhaled a shaky breath. "Yes, of course." Her remorse was evident, and she looked as if she had aged a few years in the past 5 minutes. Philip patted her shoulder and offered a small smile. "Off you go, then. Take a moment to collect yourself in the staff area if you need it." As Diana slipped away, Keanu turned back to Philip. The manager met his gaze, a mix of respect and anxiety swirling in his eyes. "I can't tell you how sorry I am," Philip said. This is not what Lumiere stands for. Keanu nodded understandingly. I know, but as you've said, this can be a teaching moment, an opportunity to reaffirm the values that this place was built upon. After service tonight, let's gather everyone together so we can discuss how to move forward. Philip agreed, relief softening his features. Together, they stepped back into the dining room. As Keanu made his way to his table, the patrons who had been watching offered discreet nods and smiles of approval. The hush that had settled over the restaurant began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of normalcy, though a current of excitement lingered. Something about the place felt transformed, as though the entire staff and clientele had just collectively unmasked the superficial illusions that so often shadowed genuine kindness. Keanu settled into his seat to finish his drink, politely thanking Charles with a raised glass. Diana, emerging a few minutes later, served her remaining tables with a subdued humility that contrasted sharply with her earlier haughtiness. Though her pride had taken a blow, a spark of sincerity colored each carefully measured step and spoken word. No one knew exactly what would happen after closing, but one thing was certain. The atmosphere at Lumiere had shifted. Everyone sensed that the quiet man in the worn clothes was more than just another customer. He was a wake-up call, one that beckoned them to revisit the true meaning of hospitality. The dinner rush at Lumiere wound down. Patrons finished their desserts, coffee cups clinked on saucers, and the final checks were settled. The once bustling dining room gradually emptied, leaving only a scattering of late-night diners. With a thoughtful glimmer in his eyes, Keanu Reeves observed the staff from his table, taking note of who was sincere in their service and who might be putting on a performance. Philip discreetly approached each table, thanking guests for their patience throughout the evening's unusual tension. Most patrons, like Nate, Olivia, and Charles, departed wearing satisfied smiles. Some offered parting words of empathy, remarking how the evening had turned into a lesson on dignity and respect for all. Keanu, lingering in his seat, waited until the last guests paid their bills and drifted out into the Beverly Hills night. The clock struck closing time. Quietly, Philip locked the front doors and dimmed the ornate chandeliers to a softer glow. The emptiness of the restaurant accentuated the gold leaf detailing on walls and the marble floors, as though the space were carefully holding its breath for what was to come. The entire staff, servers, hosts, cooks, dishwashers, assembled in the main dining area, forming a semicircle around Keanu and Philip. Diana stood near the back, arms folded tight against her body. Gone was her earlier swagger. She stared at the floor, cheeks tinged pink from remorse, though a flicker of gratitude crossed her features that she was still here and not sent away in shame. There was a sense of collective anticipation. Everyone knew that Keanu Reeves wasn't just a random diner. He had a personal stake in Lumiere's success and identity. Keanu surveyed the group with a gentle smile. Despite the drama, he radiated calm sincerity. "Thank you all for taking the time to meet," he began, his voice resonating softly in the hush. "I'm aware that tonight was unusual, but moments like these can reveal what we stand for and what we need to change." Eyes flicked toward Diana, but Keanu continued without singling her out. "I want to stress something that Philip and I both believe in. Lumiere was founded on the principle that everyone who steps inside should feel welcome. Not just the wealthy, not just the famous, but everyone. If we lose that, we lose what makes this place special." The group seemed transfixed, no one daring to fidget or break the silence. Even the chefs, usually so engrossed in the kitchen's controlled chaos, stood attentively with folded arms. Diana glanced up, meeting Keanu's eyes briefly, then looking away, as if overwhelmed by the weight of her own mistake. "This evening," Keanu went on, "some of you saw how judgments based on appearance can lead to an ugly situation. We might see worn clothing and assume a person doesn't belong. We might glance at their shoes or whether they have a reservation and decide they're unworthy. But we never truly know who that person is or what burdens they carry until we treat them with respect." He paused, letting his words settle. A subdued hush enveloped the group. Philip stood beside him, nodding in quiet agreement. We must be better than our assumptions, the manager added, tone earnest. Good service is about genuine care, not just following formalities. At last, Diana raised her hand timidly, eyes misty with contrition. If I may speak, she said, voice trembling. Keanu inclined his head, encouraging her. I just want to say, I'm sorry. Diana continued, turning to the staff. I realize I let pride get the better of me. I was so concerned about image that I forgot basic human decency. I owe all of you an apology. To Mr. Reeves especially. She took a deep breath. I'm prepared for whatever disciplinary steps Philip decides on, but I also want you all to know I'm committed to changing. This place means a lot to me. I don't want to be the reason our reputation suffers. From behind the semicircle, Lisa, her co-worker, stepped forward. Diana, I think we've all been guilty of making assumptions at times. It's just that tonight, the consequences were more visible. But we can grow from this. Several staff members murmured in agreement. The tension softened, replaced by a cautious feeling of unity. Keanu watched them intently, heartened by their willingness to address the issue openly. Diana, your apology is a step in the right direction, he said gently. True growth doesn't happen overnight. But acknowledging where we fell short is the first step. Philip placed a supportive hand on Diana's shoulder. We'll talk about the details in private, but for now, let's focus on what we can all learn. Our mission is to make every person who walks and feel that Lumiere is a place of welcome and warmth. Let's rededicate ourselves to that ideal. A renewed hush enveloped them, as though a collective sigh was being drawn. The staff inched closer, forging a sense of closeness that had been strained by the drama. Even the dishwasher in the back, rarely involved in front-of-house affairs, nodded in affirmation. In a concluding tone, Keanu cleared his throat. I won't take more of your time. I know many of you worked hard tonight. But remember, courtesy is not about catering only to the influential. It's about honoring our shared humanity. He cast a look around the circle, letting each person see the sincerity in his eyes. We can do better, and I believe we will. Philip signaled for the meeting to end. Some employees headed back to the kitchen to gather their belongings, while others took a moment to approach Keanu personally, expressing their regret and promising to uphold the restaurant's true spirit. Diana lingered behind, shoulders tense with the knowledge that she still had a private conversation ahead. Yet a small flicker of hope had taken root inside her. She might have failed tonight, but she realized she had the opportunity to learn from that failure. Walking through the now quiet dining room, Keanu noticed the hush felt different, no longer cold or tense, but thoughtful, almost reverent. The echo of footsteps on marble was a reminder of how easily illusions of grandness could be stripped away to reveal the heart of a place. Standing in front of the large windows that framed the glittering Beverly Hills street, he inhaled deeply, proud that the night's conflict had turned into a moment of reflection. Once the staff dispersed to their respective post-shift routines, only a few remained behind: Philip, Diana, and Keanu Reeves himself. The lights in Lumiere were dimmed further, leaving just enough glow for them to navigate the ornate tables and chairs. The hush allowed them to speak softly, voices echoing in the expansive space. Diana stood to one side, shifting her weight nervously from foot to foot. Philip approached her first. I appreciate that you apologized, he said quietly, but I also need you to understand the seriousness of what happened. You didn't just disrespect a patron. You disrespected a principal. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I know. I was caught up in my own idea of what this restaurant is supposed to be. I've served so many well-known figures that I forgot the importance of humility. From across the room, Keanu stepped closer, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. Diana, if you genuinely want to grow from this, Lumiere will continue to be a place for you. One act of error doesn't define you forever, unless you let it. What matters is your willingness to change. His gentle tone soothed some of her anxiety. She mustered a small smile. Thank you, she said. I really do want to stay and do better. Philip gave a short nod. That's good to hear. We'll put a note in your file about tonight's incident, but I believe in second chances, especially if they're paired with sincerity. He glanced at Keanu for confirmation, who nodded in agreement. Feeling a wave of relief, Diana inhaled deeply. I won't let you down again. She turned to Keanu, looking more composed. I'm honestly sorry for the way I treated you. It wasn't just about the clothes you wore. It was my own narrow mindset. He responded with a reassuring smile. Let's leave it in the past. Just remember, kindness should never be optional. With the tension finally eased, Diana thanked both of them again and excused herself to gather her belongings. She walked toward the staff locker area, shoulders visibly lighter than before. Philip and Keanu lingered, the faint glow from an exit sign illuminating the space between them. Philip exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I'm truly sorry you had to experience that, Keanu. You've always been so supportive of Lumiere. We strive to embody your vision, but sometimes an individual slips. Keanu shrugged gently. Human beings aren't perfect. All that matters is how we address mistakes when they surface. Tonight showed me that Lumiere's core is still strong. The staff is mostly good people, led by someone who cares about upholding decency. Thank you, Philip said, sincerity evident in his voice. And thank you for handling it the way you did. Some might have erupted in anger or demanded immediate firings, but you turned it into a lesson. Keanu pressed his lips into a half-smile. I've learned that anger rarely solves anything. A little understanding goes a long way, especially when people are willing to listen. They both glanced around the dining room, now empty and still. The city lights outside glimmered through the tall windows. In that moment, Lumiere felt more like a quiet sanctuary than a bustling high-end restaurant. Keanu was reminded of why he'd invested in the place. Not for prestige or profit, but to create a haven where people could experience both culinary delight and genuine warmth. I'll lock up once I finalize the day's reports, Philip said, snapping Keanu out of his thoughts. Is there anything else you need before you go? Keanu shook his head. No, I'm good. Thank you. Philip, let's all reflect on tonight. See it as an opportunity to strengthen what we've built here. They exchanged a brief, respectful handshake. Philip walked off toward the manager's office, leaving Keanu alone to make his way to the exit. The hushed grandeur of Lumiere accompanied him, and as he stepped outside, a gentle breeze ruffled his hair. The neon glow of Beverly Hills streets stretched before him. He paused under the ornate archway, gaze drifting to the sign that read Lumiere. A faint grin played on his lips as he recalled how differently the evening began. Diana's withering stares, the silent curiosity of the other diners, the creeping tension that had nearly soured his meal. And yet, something positive had blossomed from that strife. Walking down the sidewalk, he felt a certain lightness, as though he'd just witnessed the restaurant reaffirm its soul. Memories of how Diana's cold exterior had melted into remorse crossed his mind. He thought of Charles, Nate, and Olivia, the diners who had quietly sympathized with him. Perhaps, next time, they would step forward more boldly. Perhaps everyone who witnessed tonight's events would remember that how we treat the person who appears least important speaks volumes about our own character. In the distance, the lights of other restaurants and shops sparkled, each with its own stories unfolding behind closed doors. Keanu Reeves turned a corner, slipping into the city's late-night hush. Grateful that he'd chosen to dine at Lumiere Incognito, a reminder had been planted. Decency and empathy can, and must, exist everywhere, even in the glitziest corners of the world. Long after the last plate was cleared and the final glass polished, the lesson from that night at Lumiere remained. Diana realized that her greatest mistake wasn't overlooking a wealthy patron or failing to recognize a co-owner. It was dismissing someone's worth based on appearances. Her transformation, sparked by Keanu Reeves's quiet grace, served as a reminder for everyone who witnessed it. True elegance isn't about designer labels or expensive meals. It's about genuine respect for each other as human beings. The staff would recall how a silent tension had swept the dining room, exposing the hollowness of superficial judgments. Yet rather than spiraling into an ugly confrontation, the moment evolved into an opportunity for growth. Kindness, it turned out, carried more weight than any brand name on a menu or outfit. When the facade of status was stripped away, what mattered was empathy, treating a stranger with dignity. Philip, the manager, took the experience to heart. He renewed his commitment to ensure Lumiere was a welcoming place for all, from casual diners to global celebrities. The next day, he convened a meeting to reinforce that humility and open-mindedness must guide every interaction. This shift in perspective didn't just benefit the restaurant's reputation. It shaped a more positive environment for staff and patrons alike. As for Keanu, he walked away with quiet satisfaction, knowing that real change often begins in small, local moments of reflection. One conversation, one gentle call to conscience, can inspire people to be their better selves. In a city famous for flash and fame, a simple act of decency had rippled outwards, reminding everyone that kindness always has a seat at the table. Thank you for sharing this journey with us on Dear Heroic Life. If you found inspiration in this tale, stay tuned for more stories of empathy, resilience, and hope, and remember to keep kindness in your heart.